Hey friends, today I have another biography, which is a true story about somebody's life. It's called The Brave Cyclist, The True Story of a Holocaust Hero by Amalia Hoffman, illustrated by Chiara Fedele. I really enjoyed learning about the Holocaust because it was such a horrible time, but I just find it so fascinating that anything like that could happen, and I really enjoy reading about people who tried to do their part to make it stop. And this cyclist became a champion of the Tour de France. If you've ever heard of it, it's a huge bicycle race. It's very world renowned, which means everybody knows about this race. And he became a champion, and he started moving documents to help save Jewish people during World War II. And this is his story. It's a really great book. I love biographies. They're super interesting. It's very great to see everybody who's just born a normal person grows up and does something very heroic or very interesting or invents something. Gino Bartali clutched the handlebars. Too short for Papa's bike, he shifted from side to side like a clumsy pinguino. His friends giggled, but Gino worried only about keeping his balance. Pedaling along the bank of the Arno River in Italy, he dreamed of cycling on a shiny bike of his own. Mama and Papa could hardly scrape together enough money to pay for food and clothes. So when Gino turned 12, he spent his summer working to earn money for a bike. He could only find a boring job, helping farmers shred dried palm tree leaves into string used for weaving baskets. When the summer ended, and with a few extra lira from his family, Gino had enough money to buy an old, rusty bike. Despite being small and sickly, Gino often left his friends on steep, daring climbs. The slope was called Macoli, which means curses. Gino was amazed that he could easily outrace his friends to the top, even though they were bigger and stronger. From there, Gino could look down on the city of Florence and its cathedrals, palazzos, and grand synagogue. Gino wanted to learn more about cycling, and as a sixth grader, he took a part-time job at a bike shop. The shop owner, Oscar Casamonti, repaired racing bikes. He also competed in local races. Although Gino had a hard time concentrating on schoolwork, he listened attentively as Casamonti explained how to repair punctured tires, adjust brakes, and fix broken frames. One day, Casamonti invited Gino to join him and his fellow racers on a ride. The cyclist pedaled through the Tuscan hills surrounding the villages of Ponte a Emma, where Gino lived. Some riders dropped out along the way, but Gino kept going. Casamonti was so impressed that he urged Gino's parents to let the boy compete in professional races. Biking is especially popular in Europe and in other parts of the world, more popular than it is here, although here it's starting to be pretty popular also, but it's always been really popular in Europe. At first, Papa and Mama refused. They worried that the sport was too dangerous, and Gino had always been so frail and weak, but Gino kept pleading. Finally, on Gino's 17th birthday in July 1931, Papa gave in and granted his son the best birthday wish ever: permission to enter races and compete against other cyclists for awards. Gino's heart sped up. He had won Papa's trust, and now he must make himself a winner. Each morning, as the rooster crowed, Gino rose to perform 24 exercises. He trained to strengthen his muscles. He learned to slow down his breathing while riding long distances. Gino taught himself how to switch between sitting on the bike and standing on the pedals. He experimented with different diets to see which helped him the most. During one race, he gobbled up a dozen raw eggs, cracking their shells on his handlebars as he rode. Ugh, that sounds gross. And back then, the bikes weren't as sleek and strong and fast as they are now. Bikes have changed a lot, so he really had to work hard to become competitive. By age 21, the frail boy had turned into a powerful racer. When Gino joined a racing team, he had to prove himself as a gregario. That's a rider who must do everything to help his team's leader win the race. Gino carried water bottles and changed tires on the road for the other cyclists. Soon he gained respect and became the captain of his own team. Gino participated in races across Italy, and in 1936 he won his country's most prestigious competition, the Giro d'Italia, and earned enough money to buy a home for his parents. Oh, that's pretty cool. He bought his parents a house. I love that. But Gino's wheels kept spinning for more. The most important event in the cycling world was the Tour de France. For many miles and many days, riders raced through France's most monstrous mountains. In 1938, Gino was ready for the challenge. I think I told you that my husband is from France, and he bikes a lot. And he does a lot of bike races. He hasn't done the Tour de France, of course, but he's done another really, really big ride where you have to ride 900 miles in 4 days. Pretty crazy, and it's all the way across France. Racing on rugged roads, Gino charged up jagged, grueling slopes in the Pyrenees mountain range. Pain penetrated his muscles, but he kept climbing until he reached the highest peak. But as Gino swooped downhill, he noticed that some spectators had stepped into the road to cross over to the other side. Gino was terrified that he might hit them, so he clenched the brakes, and he was thrown from the bike and flew into the air. That's terrible. They should have been way more careful not to be stepping out into the road. That's so dangerous. Gino crashed to the ground, suffering scrapes, cuts, and bruises to his arms and legs. His bike ended up in a tangle, its front wheel crushed. As pain throbbed from his hips to his chest, Gino counted the seconds as he waited for a replacement for the damaged wheel. When his crew finally finished the work, he gathered his strength to get back on the bike in spite of the pain. Gino pressed on but couldn't make up for lost time. The Belgian riders had passed him, and he wouldn't win that stage of the race. But 15 days remained in the Tour. Gino was determined not to be defeated by the crash. You know how disappointing it is when you work really, really hard for something, whether it's a test or a race like this, and then it just doesn't go well. It just feels really, really bad. Gino fought to take the lead once again. His pulse pounded as he attacked the dirt and gravel course, storming up and down the high summits of the Alps and speeding toward victory. Declared King of the Mountains, Gino got to wear the yellow jersey, an honor reserved for the winner of each daily stage. He kept the yellow jersey all the way to the finish line in Paris. As Gino rode into the stadium there, reporters and photographers crowded around him while thousands of spectators cheered him on. But Gino feared that the taste of victory would be bittersweet. There was trouble back in Italy. That's pretty cool. He won his first Tour de France. It's incredible. It's a very grueling, difficult race, especially back then. At that time, the Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini had declared himself Il Duce, meaning simply the leader. Anyone daring to disagree with him risked severe punishment. Mussolini decided who should compete in sporting competitions. Champions were expected to praise and thank him to show their loyalty. After winning the Tour de France, it was Gino's turn to speak to the crowds in Paris. Gino thanked his coach, saying, "During a moment when my legs started to become heavy or I felt the burning in my stomach, I heard your voice, and then soon enough, I felt myself comforted." Later, speaking over the radio, Gino thanked his fans and teammates, but didn't mention Mussolini, which is bad. Gino's speech angered the authorities back in Italy. The hero who had fought so hard to win the world's greatest bicycling competition would receive no grand reception when he returned to his country. In July 1938, Mussolini published a hateful document declaring that Jewish citizens were enemies of the state. Jewish children were expelled from public schools and couldn't play in public parks. Their parents were often forced out of their jobs. Mussolini teamed with the German leader Adolf Hitler, who declared similar laws in Germany. Many Jewish people who were not born in Italy were dragged out of their homes and even arrested. Jewish people were forced to carry documents bearing their photographs, names, and signatures at all times. That way soldiers could identify them. As World War II raged into the autumn of 1943, Gino received a mysterious telephone call. The call came from Gino's good friend, Cardinal Elia dalla Costa, the Archbishop of the Church in Florence. The Cardinal wanted to meet Gino in private. When Gino arrived in Dalla Costa's office, the Cardinal closed the door behind them. Then, in a hushed voice, he explained a secret plan. Dalla Costa wanted to save Jewish people in Italy by supplying them with false identification cards so they could escape to safety. Two skilled printers from the city of Assisi, Luigi and Trento Brisa, had already agreed to secretly print the documents. They would use real photographs but change the addresses, places of birth, and signature, giving each Jewish person a non-Jewish name and a new identity. The cardinal wanted to know if Gino would help them. Gino was puzzled. The only jobs he had ever had were those of a farmhand, bike mechanic, and bike racer. How could he help? The cardinal explained how Gino could use his bike for something even more daring than racing up and down the steepest mountains. Gino knew that helping the Jewish people was a crime punishable by imprisonment or even death. Still, he agreed to be a secret courier for the cardinal. Gino would risk his safety to help people he'd never met. Early one morning, Gino picked up documents from Della Costa's assistant in Florence. The papers included photos of Jewish people and their identification cards. After removing the seat and a post from his bike, Gino hid the documents inside the hollow bicycle frame. Then he sped off to deliver them to the printers in the town of Assisi. The trip of some 110 miles would not be an easy one. On the road, soldiers halted Gino at a checkpoint. His heart raced. Surely his bike would be searched. Gino feared that what the men might do to him if they discovered his secret cargo. So look, here he is. He's sticking the documents into the tube of his bicycle. The soldiers recognized Gino as their beloved Italian championship cyclist. He used his fame to his advantage. Gino asked the soldiers not to touch his bike and made up an excuse. The distance between his seat, handlebars, and pedals had to be precise to avoid muscle strain, he explained. The soldiers believed him. Gino wiped the sweat off his forehead and continued his journey. When he arrived in Assisi, Gino delivered the documents from the cardinal's assistant. In exchange, he picked up the forged identification cards that Luigi and Trento Brisa had prepared. The new identification cards bore non-Jewish names. Gino hoped that the precious documents would save Jewish people. He hid them in his bike and hurried back to Florence. So if you're a racer, you have to practice a lot. So that's one reason he wouldn't draw suspicion, is that he'd be riding a lot. Along the way, Gino spotted an army patrol. He steered onto a side road and hid in the bushes. When daylight faded, he spotted glowing lights in the dark. Worried they could be the headlights of military motorcycles, he rubbed mud all over his bike's frame. That way the chrome wouldn't shine in the light of an oncoming vehicle. For months, Gino encountered new obstacles with each mission. He rode with many questions on his mind. Could he convince the soldiers that his frequent trips were solely for training purposes? What if he couldn't get back in time to deliver the documents? What would happen to the people whose lives depended on him? The faces of innocent people in the photographs he smuggled reminded Gino that his mission was worthy of any sacrifice. He became more determined with each trip. People had to have these documents, or there's no way they could try to escape. Gino couldn't predict what would happen in this war-ridden country. Danger filled each day in Italy. Once, when Gino stopped for coffee, a burst of machine gun fire almost hit his bike. In 1944, Gino's worst fear came true. Il Duce's authorities discovered some letters from the church in Rome thanking Gino for his good work. The authorities didn't know that what Gino had done, but they accused him of selling guns to groups fighting against Mussolini. Il Duce's men locked Gino in a dark cell. Sitting on a filthy floor, he heard the screams of prisoners being beaten. Gino was questioned for 3 days. He finally convinced the squad that he hadn't delivered guns, but only helped to provide food for the poor. Freed from jail, but anxious and shaken, Gino worried that he would not be able to continue his important work. One day he heard a shrieking blast. The Germans were blowing up most of the bridges around Florence. They wanted to slow down the British forces, and they were advancing toward the city in an effort to defeat Hitler and Mussolini. Can you imagine that people treat each other this way? I just find it so shocking. On August 11th, 1944, the bells rang out over the Bargello, the People's Palace in Florence. As Jewish people crept out of their hiding places and joined crowds dancing in the streets, Gino heard the news. More than 4 years of war, terror, and hardship had come to an end. Gino had prayed that Mussolini and Hitler would be defeated, and now his prayers had been answered. After months of hiding, trembling, and concealing his secret, Gino joined the happy crowd. Italians were free of their dictator and safe from the war. Soon Gino shined up his bike. Most of us have been lucky not to have to live right during a war, like inside a war, and how terrifying that would be. Though peace had finally returned, the effects of war remained. Women scurried around searching for scraps of food. Children played in the rubble of destroyed buildings, and Gino was determined to lift the spirits of his fellow Italians. He began planning his next race. At age 34, he was considered an old man in the sport of cycling. Many fans wondered if Gino could compete against much younger riders. But Gino trained with fierce determination, just as he had in his youth. In 1948, caked in mud and soaked by rain, he won the Tour de France for the second time. People of all races and religions celebrated. Neither poverty nor hardship could weaken their spirits. The frail, sickly boy who'd once struggled to ride his papa's bike had restored Italians' faith in freedom and justice. That's pretty amazing. So here's a real picture of what he looks like. And here is a bunch more information about him. You know, I keep saying that if you, nonfiction books will always have information in the back. Here's a picture of the author and the illustrator. And even though I have followed the Tour de France, and here's some bibliography, which means other books that they use to get information, I have not heard of him before, and now I feel like doing some more research and learning a little bit more about him because I think he's so fascinating and so brave. So I hope you enjoy learning about these people. I think it's just really great to learn about people's lives and how brave they can be and how smart they can be and the things they contribute to our world. All right, friends, happy reading.